We are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. We have got star-studded audience lined up for you on Zoom right now, ready to get underway with a new Masechta, ladies and gentlemen. Masechta Bava Batra, chapters 1 and 2. Are you ready, guys? Then let's get ourselves underway. Bava Batra deals with monetary issues, and in the first chapter, we are going to be learning about partners who want to divide property. Everybody say, ooh. So here we go. We're going to get the words up for you on the screen and get ourselves underway with a brand new Masechta starting any minute now. Chapter 1, Mishnah Aleph. So we have to try and picture a situation here where two partners are wishing to divide a courtyard. And if the courtyard is big enough, then Reuven, let's call him Reuven, can force Shimon to build a wall. So we're dealing with a case here where two people are agreeing to divide. All right, so the Mishnah says, Hashutafin shiratzu lasos mechitza b'chatzer. Two partners who want to build a partition in their courtyard. Bonin esakotel ba'emsa. You can build the wall, you should build the wall in the middle. And half of the wall will be on each property. So the Mishnah says, Makom shnagu livnos gavil, gazis, kafisin, olevenim, bonim. There's 4 different types of bricks we're going to be dealing with. And whichever that area or that place is customary to, whichever material or type of brick that place is customary to build with, that's what you should build with. So what are these 4 different types of brick? Gavil are stones with jagged edges. Gusses are stones with smooth edges. They're chiseled stones which are smooth. Kafisin are a half-width brick. And levanim are a full-sized, full-width brick. Now, each side can force the other to build up to 4 amos in height, but we have to go do a little bit of mathematics to work out how much of the width of the wall is going to end up in both properties. Remember, it has to be 50-50, it has to be built in the middle. So each of these different bricks have different widths. So the Mishnah says, Hakol kamin hagamedina, everything according to the place where you are. Bigavil, when it comes to these rough stones, zeno sen shloshat tefachim, zeno sen shloshat tefachim. Each brick is 6 tefachim thick. So that means that 3 tefachim is going to land on each side of the property, of the courtyard. Begazis, zeno sen tefachim mechetza, zeno sen tefachim mechetza. The width of a gazis brick is 5 tefachim. So you're going to have 2.5 on one side and 2.5 on the other. Big feasin with the half size bricks. Zeno sen tefachim, zeno sen tefachim. Each one is going to give 2 tefachim because the width of those bricks is 4 tefachim, 4 handbreadth. And bilaveni with a full size brick, which is only 3 tefachim wide. Zenotain tefachim mechetza v'zenotain tefachim mechetza. Each one is going to give 1.5 tefachim of their space to be able to accommodate this wall. In that way, if the wall was to fall, if it's participated by both, and they have shared ownership in the wall, if the wall falls down, then the space where the wall stood and the stones that fall down are going to belong to both of them equally and will be divided up equally. Mishnah base, going to be talking about fences in gardens. You can obligate a neighbor to build with you between gardens. So the Mishnah says, "V'chein begina." Similarly, in regards to a garden, makom shenahagu legader mechayev inoso. If it's a place where it's customary to build a fence, to build a partition, then you can mechayev the other person. You can obligate the person to share in the building costs of the wall. Aval babika, but in the valley there was no minhag. There was a minhag not to build in a valley. So makom shenahagu shelo ligdor ein mechayevin also. If there's a place where it's not customary to build, then you can't obligate the other person to participate in the costs of erecting the fence or erecting the wall. Ela in rotzeh kones l'so shelo uvoneh v'oseh chazis mibachutz. But if that's the case, then what you are allowed to do is you're allowed to go into your own field and build the partition there. So if there was no minhag, then that's what you would have to do. Now, I thought this was going into his property to be able to do it. So shalom. Mark, is it meaning going into your own property or going to his own property?
It was your own property because
right,
you're
okay.
the one that wants to build a wall.
Fine. That's what
you're protecting your ground. You're protecting your wall.
That's what I thought, but I've written it down wrongly somewhere. Okay, never mind. And then you can make a border mark on the outer side of the barrier facing the neighbor's property, which would indicate that you have paid and you have built this structure, and therefore he can't later try and claim that he owns half of that space. Therefore, if the wall was to fall down, you would own the space and the stones that fall down. If it was done with the knowledge of both parties, then you would build the wall in the middle, and then you would demarcate on either side of the wall to indicate that you've got shared ownership of the space. And therefore, if the wall was to fall down, the walls and the bricks and the space would be owned and shared and divided equally. Mishnah Gimel, we're discussing a field which is surrounded on all four sides by fields belonging to another owner. So it's surrounded by 4 fields in each direction, owned by one singular owner. So the Mishnah says, if someone has 3 fields surrounding 3 sides of your field, so if you are surrounded on 3 sides by fields owned by one person, and he built a partition on the first and second and the third sides, then you can't obligate the neighbor who owns the inner field to contribute to the construction of this partition, because if it's a place where the minhag is to not to force, then in such an instance you wouldn't be able to force him to contribute to the cost if he doesn't want it. Rabbi Yossi says that since the 4th wall is going to benefit the inner person, because now his property is protected on all 4 sides and nothing can get in, therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's now going to roll over the need to contribute to all 4 of the fences, because of the fact that he is now benefiting so much from the protection afforded by this wall that's been built by the outer owner. But according to the Tanakama, he's only going to have to pay for that 4th wall, because there is benefit that everyone agrees to, and that benefit is having your property completely fenced in. But according to one position, the Tanakama, he's only going to have to pay for the costs of the 4th wall. And according to Rabbi Yossi, he now has to bear the brunt of paying for all 4 of the fences that have been put up. Mishnah Daled. In this case,
might not he be inconvenienced by having his plot landlocked like that?
I think the presumption here is that he's benefiting, and that's the logic to being able to coerce him to cough up the cash. I guess if he was being inconvenienced, then the halacha would probably be different, but the assumption here is that he's benefiting. I'm sure in the Gemara there's lots of variations on this case to explore thoroughly, and when you get there you can let us know. Mishnah Daled. So the case over here is a wall in a chatzer, a wall in a courtyard, which was either big enough to force the other person to contribute, or they agreed to the original building of it. But the maximum you can force someone to contribute to is the minimum amount that would afford you privacy, according to Chazal, which is 4 amos. So even if the original wall was higher, if that wall was to fall down and you now want to demand payment from the other guy, you're only going to be able to claim the amount that would cover the cost of affording you minimum amount of privacy. So Mishnah Dalet, Kosel Chatzer Shenafal, a wall of a courtyard falls down. Mechayev enoso livnoso adabar amos. You can oblige and obligate the other guy to contribute up to 4 amos. Bechezkas shenosan, if he is presumed to have given his share, so he is presumed to have given his share of the money, ad shiavi raya shalonasan, until the claimant brings to the court proof that he hasn't yet contributed. Me'arba amos ulamala, if we're dealing with a wall that is 4 amos or higher, ein chayiv, so then you can't obligate him to be able to contribute. Samach lo kosel acher, and if you you also if the other guy was to build a wall against your wall, right? So kind of an L shape like that. He's now leaning one wall against your wall. Even though he has not yet set a roof over it, a tikra beam over it, you are megalgalin alav esakol is nonetheless going to roll over and force him to pay for the cost of your original wall. So the situation here is that he is benefiting from the wall that you have built, but he has not contributed to. And now he's going and propping up another wall against that with the intention maybe of making some kind of enclosure on his side of the wall. So now the fact that he's benefiting so much from the wall that you took the time and the money to build, he now has to pay for the share which you had originally demanded of him. And in this instance, he is presumed to not have given his share of money, unless he brings proof that he in fact did give money to pay for the cost of the wall. Mishnah Hay, we're going to be talking about various projects that courtyard residents, shared courtyard residents, can be forced to contribute to. So the Mishnah says, Kofin osoliv no space shar v'deles lechatzer. You can force a co-owner of the courtyard to pay for the cost of building a gate, a base sha'ar, gatehouse, v'deles, and a door to the jointly owned courtyard. You can, it's like vadabayit on an apartment building. You can impose certain costs to the residents of the building. So this is the first case, that you are allowed to force other residents to cover the cost of the security guard and the front door to the building. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, lo chol hachatzeros re'uyos lebeis shar. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, not all courtyards, not all apartment buildings require a gatehouse and a security guard, and so therefore it has to be determined by the needs of the particular residency. You can impose on all the residents of a city to contribute towards the cost of the wall, the perimeter wall, and the doors of the entrance to the city, and of riach, and the bolts, or the crossbar there, as it says on the screen, of the gates to the city. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, lo kol ha'arayos re'uyos lachoma. Not every city is suited to have a wall and a gate surrounding it, and so each case is going to have to be decided on its individual merits. How long does a person have to be a resident in a city to be considered like a resident of the city? They must have been part of that city for 12 months before they are obligated in contributing to the costs. Kanaba beis dira, but if he bought property in the city, then he's going to be like a resident of the city immediately, and is going to therefore have to contribute to any of the forced contributions that he would have to make. Mishnah Vav, the Mishnah says as follows. Ein cholkin es achatzer ad shehe arba amos lazeh va'arba amos lazeh. So we're somewhat qualifying and modifying the halacha in Mishnah Aleph, and we're saying that you can only divide a courtyard if each person is going to end up with at least 4 amos by 4 amos on each side. That's the minimum area for each of the joint owners. Velo es hasadeh, and you can't divide up a field ad shehe ba tisha kabin lazeh v'tisha la kabin lazeh, until each side is going to have Tisha Kabin, 9 kav of space to be able to plant. That's how much you need to be able to assure each resident of, which is about 3,750 amos squared. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad shehe ba tishas chatzoi kabin hazeh v'tishas chatzoi kabin hazeh, until each person has got 9 half kavs, which is 4.5 kavs, which is about 1,875 amot squared. So it's a smaller space. Velo es hagina, and you won't be able to divide up a garden ad shehe ba chatzi kav lazeh v'chatzi kav lazeh, unless each owner is going to end up with a half kav each, which is about 208 1/3 amot squared. Rabbi Akiva Omer beis rova. Rabbi Akiva says it has to be the amount of a beis rova, which is a quarter kav, which is 104 1/6 amot squared. Velo es hatraklin, and you can't divide up different types of palaces. So how does it translate it there? A traklin, a hall, fine. Velo es hamoran, and not a tower, which I have it translated here, and there it's translated as a drawing room. Velo es a shovach, or a chicken coop, a dove cot, as it says there. Velo es a talis, a cloak. Velo es a merchatz, or a bathhouse. Velo es beis habad, or an olive press. Ad shehe bahen kadei lazeh kadei lazeh. Unless by dividing it, the thing that you are dividing is still going to retain its name. As long as it retains its name, you can divide it. But if it becomes too small to be considered as the thing that you are dividing, then you won't be able to do that. Zehaklal, this is the rule. Kol she'echalek u'shmo alav cholkin. Anything that you can divide up and it will still be recognizable as the original item or the original space, you can divide it up. Ve'im lav ein cholkin. If not, you do not divide it. Meaning you can't impose the division on the other party. Masai, when is this? But as Manshain Shnehem writes in, this is when they don't both agree to dividing these spaces. Aval bizman shnehem writes in, but if they do, afilim pachos mikan yachloku. Even if they are ending up with smaller spaces, you would be able to divide them up if they are in agreement. The kisvei hakodesh, and when it comes to dividing up holy scriptures, sacred writings, scrolls containing any of the 24 books of the Bible, if they are inherited and owned by 2 people, afal pi shnehem rotzim, even though they both may agree to dividing it, lo yachloki, you won't be able to divide them, and that's because you're going to be showing disrespect to the scrolls by dividing them up. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing Perek Aleph, chapter 1 of Maseches Bava Batra. Let's continue with chapter 2. Chapter 2, we're going to be talking about things you can't do at the edge of a field because of the damage that it might do to the owner of the other field or the other space, to the neighbor. So the Mishnah says, Lo yachpor adam bor, samach leboro shel chavero. You can't dig a pit close to the pit of your neighbor. And the assumption here is that you're not leaving enough thickness in the wall, and you're going to cause crumbling in the other pit. So if that's the case, you can't do it. Velo shiach, or with a ditch, a rectangular pit. Velo ma'ara, or with a cave or a square pit. Velo amas hamayim, nor with a water channel. Velo nivreches kovsin, or with a launderer's pool, a launderer's pond. Unless you leave 3 tefachim of distance and you plaster lime on the side of yours so that it will protect the other pit and protect your pit too. Marchikin es hagefes ve'es hazevel ve'es hamelach ve'es hasid ve'es haslaim mikos lo shechavero shlosha tefachim. You have to leave a distance of 3 tefachim when you've got gefes, which is the discarded sediment of olives, ves hazevel, fertilizer, ves hamelach, salt, ves hasid, lime, ves haslime, and rocks. Mikot lo shel chavero shlosha tfachim v'sad basid. You have to leave 3 tfachim distance between the piles that you are creating and the wall of your neighbor's property, and you have to plaster the wall with lime to be able to protect it and prevent it from damage. Marchikin es hazraim, you have to distance seeds, ve'esa macharesha, and plows, ve'es meiraglaim, and urine, minakosel shlosha tfachim, from the wall 3 tfachim. Marchikin es reichayim, shlosha min hashechev, shein arba min harechet, and you have to distance your mill, your grinder, 3 tfachim distance from the lower stone of the mill to the neighbor's wall, which would be 4 tfachim from the upper mill, upper grinder to the wall of your neighbor. Ve'esa tanur, and the same with an oven. Shlosha min hakilya, which is going to be 3 from the base of the tanur, shein arba min asafa, and which is going to be 4 tfachim from the top of the upper rim of the oven, because a tanur was cone shaped. It's where they would, bake their pita breads and things. So the shape of the tanur means that it would be a tefach narrower at the top than at the bottom. So the reason, by the way, for needing to distance your mill from the neighbor's side is because of the vibrations that are caused by the grinding and the damage that might do. And presumably for the oven, it's going to be because of the heat that can damage the space around. And if it's too close to the neighbor's wall on the neighbor's property, then you're going to cause damage to the neighbor's stuff. Mishnah base, continuing to discuss damage between 2 neighbors. You've got 2 tenants living in one house with 2 floors. So we're going to be talking about an oven in a house and how much space you have to leave between the top of the oven and the ceiling so that it doesn't damage the space above. So the Mishnah says, Lo yamid adam tana b'toch habayis, you can't put an oven in the house, ela im kain yesh al gabav gaba arba amos, unless there's 4 amos airspace between the top of the oven and the ceiling. Hayama mida ba'aliyah tzarich shehei tachtav ma'azeva shlosha tfachim, and if you are installing your oven in the top floor, then you have to make sure that underneath it you've got 3 tefachim thickness of cemented floor space to be able to protect the lower floor. Ubakira, and when it comes to a kira, which is a different type of oven, which is more rectangular shaped, and the heat is going to dissipate quicker because of that shape, so then you only need to have a tefach underneath it. The imhizik, and if you damage mishalim masha hizik, then the owner of the oven is going to have to pay for the damages. Rabbi Shimon Omer lo amru kol ashirim ha'elu ela she'im hizik patur me'lishalim. Rabbi Shimon comes along to say that the whole point of these measurements, these sizes, is that you are not going to have to pay if damage is caused. If you've left enough space, a person needs to be able to function in their house. As long as you've taken adequate precautions to prevent damaging the neighbor's property, then you are going to be exempt, according to Rabbi Shimon. Mishnah Gimel, which things is it always going to be asa to install in a lower floor because of the disturbance or damage to the neighbors? Lo yiftach adam chanut shel nachtomin v'shel tzavayim tachat otzara shel chavero. You may not open a bakery or a dye shop beneath the storeroom of a lower neighbor. And that's because the grains or the fruits that are going to be stored there are going to get damaged by the intense heat of the things that are going on in the lower floor. That's only going to be, of course, if the storeroom comes first. Continues the Mishnah, v'lo refes bakar. You also can't have refes bakar, which is a cattle barn, because the smell and the heat and the odors are going to damage the items in the storeroom. Continues the Mishnah, be'emes be'yayin hitiru of Allah refes bakar. In truth, the halacha is that if it's a storeroom of wine, then you would be permitted to set these things up, because the heat rising is not going to damage the wine. But you wouldn't be allowed to establish a cattle barn because the smell is going to get into the wine. Chanut shebachatzer, if you have a shop in the courtyard, yachol limchos biyado, then you'd be allowed to protest against the guy opening a shop. I can't get any sleep because of the traffic that's coming in and out of our shared living space. Aval ose kalim, but you would be able to, you'd be allowed to make kalim in your house, the yotze mecha b'soch hashuk, and go out and sell them in the marketplace. So you'd be able to start home business with the assumption that you're going to be taking those items out and selling them elsewhere. And you wouldn't be able to protest about someone opening up a business like this or starting to do work like this in your shared space. And you wouldn't be able to complain and say, I'm not going to be able to sleep because of the sound of your hammering, or because of the sound of your grinding, or because of the sound of the children. The assumption here, the logic here, and the sound of the children is if the person was setting up a cheder or tutoring from his house. So the assumption here is that a person needs to be able to do things in their home within reasonable levels. And so these kinds of things, setting up a home business to be able to make a parnasa, to make a livelihood, being able to teach people in your house, whatever it might be. I guess piano lessons, right? That might also be a parallel kind of example here. Whatever it might be, the assumption here is that if it's reasonable, then you're not going to be able to prevent that homeowner from doing those things. Mishnah Dalad, we're dealing with an area that was previously open and is now closed. Says the Mishnah, someone who had a wall close to the wall of another, lo yismach lo kotel acher, you can't now go and build another wall close to the neighbor's wall, unless you leave 4 amos from that person's wall, because you need space so that people can get to the wall. When it comes to putting windows or building a wall opposite the window of a neighbor's house, milamalan or milamatan, you would be whether it's above or whether it's below umikinegdan, or whether it's opposite the window, arba amos. You have to leave a space of 4 amos, so that they can see out and so that the light can get in. You have to be able to leave enough space so as not to detract from the functionality of the person's window. Mishnah Hay, dealing with neighbors with different things in their yard. So the Mishnah says, "Marchikin es hasulam min hashovach arba amos." You have to distance the ladder from the chicken coop, from the dovecot, 4 amos. Kadei shelo tikbots hanamiya, in order that I've got fox. The screen has got mongoose, but the idea is that a wild animal is not going to be able to jump and climb up into the chicken coop or into the dovecot and attack the birds. Ve'esa kosel min hamazchila arba amos, and you have to distance 4 cubits from the roof gutter, in order that the neighbor will be able to lean a ladder against his wall safely to be able to clean the space and repair the gutter. Marchikin es hashovach min ha'er 50 amma. There's a certain distance that you have to leave between the city and where you'd like to set up a dovecot, and that space is 50 amos from the city. V'lo yaseh adam shovach b'toch shalo. He may not set up a dovecot in his own property, unless he's got 50 cubits in each direction between the dovecot and the edge of his property. And I believe the reason for this is that birds are typically going to find their food within 50 amot of their birdhouse, and therefore if you don't leave enough space, the birds are going to be able to fly to other people's property and potentially get their food there. which is going to be a problem. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says it's got to be bigger. Base Arbas Korin, it's got to be the size of four the area required to plant 4 core of seeds on each side, which is actually going to be 70. 1 second. So base sa'ah is 2005 amot, and a core is 30 sa'ah, which is 75,000 amot squared, and therefore 4 core is going to be 300,000 amot squared, which is going to be the distance of the flight of a bird. And so according to this stricter position of Rabbi Yehuda, you have to leave 300,000 amot squared around you to be able to ensure that the birds are not flying off into other people's property. Melo sheger hayona, because this is the flight path of a yona, of a dove. It says the Mishnah of im lekacho, and if you buy the dovecot, afilu base rova, then even if it's a base rova of space, harehu b'ches kaso, he has acquired the privilege of having the dovecot. So that's only going to be 104 1/6 amot squared, which is 10.2 amot in each direction, which is going to be a fifth of the size. So one thing that I missed was that 300,000 amot squared in each direction, you're looking at 274 amot, I think. That's how much space you have to leave on each side. And so this smaller size, the base rova, is going to be a fifth of that. Is that right? It doesn't say. Oh, I see. Because the presumption here is that if you've bought this property and you've got a dovecot which has only got a base rova around it, the assumption here is that the neighbours have agreed, and so you'd be allowed to keep it. Okay. Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Vav is talking about finding a hefka bird, an unowned bird outside of the city. So says the Mishnah, Nipul hanimtza b'toch 50 amos. If you find a small bird within 50 amos of a dovecot, harehu shabala shavach, you can presume it belongs to the owner of that dovecot. Chutz me 50 amos, harehu shel motz'o. If it's found beyond 50 amot, then it belongs to the finder. And the assumption here is that they can't fly yet because they're too young. So if you are finding one, it must have hopped there, and it's not going to be able to hop beyond 50 amos. So if you find it and there's not a dovecot nearby, then finders keepers, losers weepers. Nimtza ben shnei shavachos. If you find it between 2 dovecots, karov lazeh shelo, then whichever one it was nearer to is going to have presumed ownership. Karov lazeh shelo. And if it was nearer to the other one, then he's going to get it. Mechza or mechza, if it's found halfway between, shneim yachloku, then the two of them have to agree to divide the value of the bird. Mishnah Zayin. Things you can't plant next to a city for an aesthetic reason. Says the Mishnah, you have to distance a tree from the city 25 amot, because fruit-bearing trees are quite nice, so they can come quite close. When it comes to carob trees and sycamore trees, you have to leave 50 amos. Any barren tree, 50 amos, has to have a distance of 50 amos away. So sycamore and carob trees have much bigger branches, and therefore you have to leave greater distance. Im ha'ir kadma, if the city came first, and then someone planted trees 2 nearby, Coat says then you can cut it down, and you don't have to give the value of the money. You don't have to give the money to the tree's owner. Vim ha'ilan kadam, and if the tree came first, and the city is expanding, Coat says then you can cut down the tree and give the owner of the tree the money, the value of the tree. Suffix zakadam, suffix zakadam. If we're not sure which came first, Coat says kadam. Then, interestingly, the city has the right to cut, and he doesn't have to give the owner the value of the tree. So that's interesting because here's Mishnaic precedent for being able to expand your living space at the expense of greenbelt, essentially. So try telling that to all of the protectors of greenbelt. Mishnah Ches, talking about making a permanent threshing floor. Says the Mishnah, Marchikin goren kavua min ha'ir 50 ama. You have to distance a fixed threshing floor from the city 50 amos. You can't do this right next to the border of the city or to the border of a neighbor because of the damage that it could cause. Lo yasa adam goren kavua b'toch shelo ela in kain yesh lo 50 ama l'chol ruach. And you can't even do it in your own property unless you've got 50 amos in each direction. Umarchik minatiyosav shel chavera uminiro kadei shelo yazik. And you have to distance a threshing floor from the young trees of another, and from another's plough field, enough space that it doesn't cause any damage. And that's because the chaff that's coming off when the threshing takes place might take root and start draining the nutrients that are otherwise going to be going to the other owner's property. Mishnah Tes. You have to leave a distance of 50 amos from the velos, which is animal carcasses if you're piling them up, and kvaros and graves, vesabursaki, and a tannery, which is very, very smelly, where they are processing hides. You have to leave 50 amos from the city. And you can only build a tannery to the east of the city, and that's because of the direction in which the wind would carry the smell. Rabbi Akiva says you can establish a tannery on any side of the city except for the west side. You have to leave 50 amos as well. And the reason, according to Rabbi Akiva, is because the Shekhinah is on the western side, and that's why you can't leave the smelly tannery. So for Mishnah Yud, we are going to have a series of Mishnayos now that deal with planting things in the proximity of your neighbor. So the Mishnah says, Marchikin esa mishra min hayarak. You have to leave a distance between flax and vegetables, ve'esa krishin min abtsalim, and you have to leave a distance between leeks and onions, ve'esa chardal min adavarim, and a distance between mustard and bees. What's the distance? What's the distance?
Doesn't say it, right?
No, it doesn't. All right, well, you have to leave a distance. There you go. Have to leave a distance. So the problem with flax is that the water is going to seep through the ground when you're soaking the flax. The water is going to seep through the ground and do damage to the vegetables. The leeks are going to take away the sharpness of the onions if they're growing too close together. And bees like to eat mustard seed, apparently, and this can impact the quality of the honey. So in all of those instances, according to the first position in the Mishnah, you have to leave a distance so that these things don't cause any detriment to the other person's items. However, according to Rabbi Yossi, matir v'chardal, Rabbi Yossi permits mustard seed being planted near to the bees because the other person can just control his bees from going into the other land. Mishnah Yud Aleph, Mishnah 11. You have to distance a tree from a person's pit 25 amos. That's the presumption that the roots of the trees are going to grow up to 25 amos, and therefore they could start damaging the other person's pit. With a charuv of a shikma, 50 ama. And with a carob and sycamore tree where the roots extend farther, you have to leave 50 amos. Bain milamala, bain min hatzad. And that is whether they are on equal level of the person's pit or whether they are above the person's pit. Im habor kadam kotses v'nosin damim. If the owner of the boar came first, or the pit came first, then you can cut down the tree and give him the value of the tree that you've cut down. V'im ilan kadam. If the tree came first, lo yakots, then you won't be able to cut it down just because you want to be able to dig a pit. Suffix zakadam, suffix zakadam, lo yakots. If there's a doubt as to which came first, you may not cut down the tree. Rabbi Yosef Omer, afal pisha bo kodem leilan. Even if the pit came first before the tree, lo yakots, you wouldn't be allowed to cut it down. Shezeh chofer b'soch shelo v'zeh noteya b'soch shelo, because this one is digging in his own property, his pit, and this one was planted in his own property, and therefore, unless I think you can prove. No, maybe if you can't prove which one came first, Rabbi Yossi would say you can't cut down the tree. Mishnah Yud Beis, we have a halacha that Rabbi Yossi does agree with. Says the Mishnah in Yud Beis, Lo yita Adam ilan samach l'stei chaveiro. You cannot plant a tree next to your friend's field, your neighbor's field, ela im kein hirchik mimenu arba amos, unless you leave 4 amos. Echad gefanim ve'echad kolilan. That's whether you are planting grapevines or any kind of tree. And the reason for that is you need to be able to leave space to plow around the tree without going into the neighbor's field. It says the Mishnah, Haya Gadeh bin Time, if there was a wall between them so that anyway you wouldn't be entering into their property to plow. Each one can plant things close to the fence from either side. But if roots start to protrude into and spread into the field of another, you can dig down 3 handbreadths, so that you don't damage your plow by running over the roots. If you are digging a bore, a pit, or a cistern, or a cave, then you would be allowed to cut on your way downwards. And the wood from the roots would belong to him because they are in his land. So fundamentally, a field owner actually owns all the land going all the way down. And therefore, whatever they find when they are needing to dig into their own property, they are going to take ownership of, and they can cut it away. Mishnah Yud Gimel. We have a case here of 2 adjoining fields, and Reuven's tree is providing shade in Shimon's field. So there's 2 issues there. Number 1, there's going to be a lack of growth in the shaded area belonging to Shimon. And number 2, you're going to be obstructed from being able to plow and work your land properly because of the branches that are covering your area, your property. So the Mishnah says, a tree that is leaning into the field of another, you're allowed to cut the branches to leave enough space for a man with a stick who is plowing. So basically, you're allowed to create enough space for someone to be able to plow. So they would have a stick to be able to guide the animal when they're plowing. And so as long as he's got enough space to do that, you can cut back the tree. When it comes to carob and sycamore trees, who have a lot of branches and cast a lot of shade, then you can basically cut everything back in line with the border of the wall, a border of the field. Beis hashlachin, when it comes to an irrigated field, kol ha'ilan keneged hamishkoles, then you can cut everything back up until the line of the border. Abashal omer kol ilan srak keneged hamishkoles. All barren trees are cut along the plumb line as well. So you're always going to be able to cut things back all the way to your perimeter, so that nothing's growing over in those cases. And finally, for tonight, Mishnah Yud Dalet, long perek, lots of Mishnayos. But here comes the last one. We've got a tree hanging over Rishus Harabim, over the public domain. Ilan shu notel Rishus Harabim. If you've got a tree that's leaning over the public domain, kotzates, then you can cut it. You can cut it down. No, you can cut the branches. Yeah, you can cut the branches back. Kadeshi hey gamal over verachmo, in order that a camel can get through without hitting the branches with a rider on the top. Rabbi Yehuda says, Gamal ta'un pishtan or chavile zamoros. You can cut back enough so that a camel loaded with flax or bundles of branches can get through, which isn't quite as high as a camel that's being ridden by a rider. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol ha'ilan keneged hamishkoles mipnei atuma. Rabbi Shimon says that you can always cut trees back to the plumb line, to the perimeter, to the border of the Rishus Harabim, and that is so that there's nothing hanging over the public area at all, due to the fact that Tumah can be carried from one person's property out into a different space through the branches that would be hanging over. So if there was a piece of corpse under a tree in Reuven's property, the branches are going to carry that Tumah into the Rishus Harabim, or to wherever it is, wherever it's hanging over, it's going to carry that ritual impurity over to that space as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 2 of Maseches Bava
Hence the
Batra.
reason why.
Pardon me?
Hence the reason why at Husband Inn we did cross-country runs. When we cut through the back of the cemetery that faces onto Holders Hill Road, the Kohanim would be sent along the Mill Hill Golf Course.
Oh, good.
For
And would they finish quicker or slower?
made no difference because it followed the same path, but they were neighbouring plots of land.
Fascinating.
And, everybody else went along the path, and the Kohanim went on trespassed along the golf course.
How very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. And with that, we'll say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 2 of Maseches Bava Batra. And please God, I think we might be able to do next week as well. I think I don't have a meeting. So with any luck, we will continue with chapters 3 and 4 next time. So until then, have a wonderful and meaningful night.